Good day, folks. Today I come to you with a story that I had initiated a long time back. It's about the assassination of Niger in Canada, the way we reacted to Canada, Jai Shankar all pumping, puffed up chest, about how, and canceled visa processes, asked folks to, diplomats to leave India, reduced the numbers here, blamed Canada for all sorts of things. Of course, fact that there is an incestuous relationship between Trudeau and the Khalistan gang is not something I debate. That's there. Obviously, that's something that he has to bear the brunt for, right? But what is important to note is that these extraterritorial killings, especially in Western countries that are our allies, have to be undertaken extremely carefully, right? Now, why was Trudeau not opening up with the proof? We thought he didn't have any. Well, now we know he does. He was waiting for the indictment to be opened in the New York courts, which it did. And let me tell you that this has been building up right since the G20, because Biden's brought it up. We've had so much traffic in the last 1 month. The NSA, the Secretary of State, various levels of officials in the security from the United States talking to Doval, talking to Modi, and telling them about this indictment, actually trying to cover and ensure that this doesn't go ballistic. But hey, just remember that the courts work in absolutely independent fashion in the United States, unlike here. And this was going to open, and Biden is no way he could stop it. So indictment did open up. And guess what? The story that spills out, right? The story is intriguing as it is devastating. It's a nail in. It could drive a wall between the United States and India, and this relationship for India is Tina. There is no alternative, right? So what happened, right? This is Akhil Gupta fellow, which obviously has been tracked for months, if not years. I have a feeling he's been tracked ever since the haul at the Mundra port, right? Akhil Gupta is the guy who's indicted in that, and he's caught in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, and he's going to be sent to the United States, repatriated to the US, and then the can of worms will really open up. And Akhil Gupta is apparently, according to this indictment, a big drug pin, right? So he kind of connects and drug pin with a lot of criminal cases against him in Gujarat. Now this is kind of strange. He's a lot of cases in Gujarat. Plus, obviously, the hauls have been unbelievable. Drug hauls from Mundra and otherwise in Gujarat, the largest in the country, right? They keep it in the middle pages, don't show it to you at all. But I mentioned this many months ago that the DEA was actually essentially responsible for nailing that shipment that we had to react to. Otherwise, it would have gone, right? Where it's gone, we don't know. So apparently, this guy who contacted Akhil Gupta basically held him, in a sense, at ransom and said that if he undertook these assassinations, then his criminal cases in Gujarat would vanish, right? Now, that's very interesting, right? Because then what he did was, where it gets tricky for India is that the person he contacted, the middleman in New York or somewhere in the United States, who then put him in touch with the actual assassin. And where the conversation actually goes on, the first assassination is for $100,000 and $15,000 of which has already been paid. You find this connectivity going all the way back to Niger is because this gentleman, the Akhil Gupta, actually has pictures of Niger's dead body riddled with bullets, right? Obviously sent to him as proof and then sent forward, which connects, basically, apparently is leading to somebody very senior in somebody in the Indian government, which is incredibly damaging, except that in all countries undertake these kind of operations with deniability, right? So I'm hoping there's deniability here, but it's going to be tough to get through, right? So now what worries is that both these guys, the assassin and the middleman, were from the DEA and another security agency of the United States. And they've been following this Akhil Gupta, or tracing him and following him for years, obviously, which tells you the kind of trouble we are going to be in, because information, once it starts getting collated in the US, you've got some trouble. You've got some trouble. So what happens here? Look forward to results of India's probe, says Blinken. New Delhi dramatically tightens its grip on social media. This is playing out there, and this is basically again had to do with this at the same time the Niger thing happened. Then you have Prague handed over Pannu plot case accused to US days before indictment. Okay. Now, why this becomes necessary for us is this. What explains India's full tilt to US? It's called TINA. It's written by Somnath Mukherjee. America's share of GDP has stayed at 24 to 25% for 50 years. Post-COVID, its 25 trillion economy saw robust growth. America more than makes up for the decline of the rest of the West. Then he says, America's economic performance continues to be stellar. Over the last 5 decades, the US has held its share of global GDP at 24 to 25%. It outlasted one potential economic competitor, Japan, whose GDP rose to about 70% of the US GDP by mid-90s, and one military competitor, erstwhile USSR, through the Cold War. After 3 decades of breathtaking growth, China is stalling economically just short of developed country level. Something that you should remember. The US spends more on the military than the next 10 powers combined. That shows up in the sinews of military power. 10 super carriers, 71 nuclear submarines give the US Navy global reach, which is unparalleled in both Pacific and the Atlantic. Okay. Above all, even the fraying architecture of the American-led global commons is a lot more robust and scalable than any alternative on the horizon. China's attempts have either turned out to be anemic, a la NDB, the development finance institution, struggling to scale up even in a world struggling for development financing, or they've turned out to be ominous, a la BRI, that's gained the reputation for endangering potentially both sovereignty and sovereign balance sheets. Emerging pieces of alternative global commons are being built on instead of being built outside the American architecture. For example, the Indian UAE trade settlement mechanism in local currencies, the UAE dirham remains pegged to the US. So don't you go thinking that it's the Indian rupee, folks. China in the company of Russia, Iran, who else? Tough to find. The one could always count Pakistan, North Korea and Cuba in the mix just for fun. And Venezuela is now out, right? A raid on America's side is Europe and parts of East Asia, but also increasingly a heavy tilt from erstwhile neutrals like India. In short, while the West as an aggregate has declined thanks mostly to Europe, the Indo-Pacific comprising US swinging India and East Asia ensures that US has backfilled that decline enough. The US is India's largest export market by a long mile. It's also the most viable source for politico-military support, while China litigates a 1,000-kilometer frontier and India's sphere of influence in the subcontinent. Pax Americana is alive and well, and it's in India's interest it stays. And you cannot go to a country that is no alternative to it and try and do this. And why does we do this? Is something funny is what Sanjay Baru, right? He says, a delusion of arrival. He says, while India is rising, it is not yet an indispensable power. Niger Pannu episode underlines this. He says, from time to time, when the going gets good, New Delhi's political leaders imagine that India has arrived. In the past, there was any number of individuals and institutions who had put in place some balances to such thinking. Over the past decade, ever such institutions have been intellectually corrupted into joining the political bandwagon. India is not yet a Vishwaguru. India is not yet an indispensable power. India's influence in its own neighborhood has gone down in this past decade. Reality check. And look at why I say the United States, unbelievable even for China. Growing number of China migrants are crossing US border, never heard of before. Chinese join migrant crush on US border. Okay. And this thing is, like I said, now I'm reading out this charges. US charges Indian in plot to kill Sikh separatists in New York. This is Akhil Gupta. Issue raised with India at highest levels of US officials. India needs to work with us, cannot take it lightly. Trudeau on Niger probe. He's out of the bill. A matter of concern. India on Pannu plot indictment. US raised issues with India at various levels. Trudeau seeks cooperation in probe again, and we'll have to give it, right? And probably cooperating with the United States, the same thing as cooperating with Niger. And poor Taranjeet, the Indian ambassador to the US, having to face the brunt. India's USNY heckled on outreach trip to New York Gurdwara. And as Vivek Kachu writes, the diplomat's challenge. He says, India's different approach in Niger and Pannu's episodes underlines the need for nimble, not shrill response. Shrill and absolutely irresponsible in my opinion. And I can't say that. It is unacceptable that any country should seek to cover Khalistani separatism under the rubric of freedom of expression or not cooperate to have terrorists face the law. The problem is that despite all these rhetoric, the focus on the Western countries is only on those who indulge in violence against their interests. That they practice double standards is obvious, but so do we. But then the world is full of double standards, including in India. This is so despite all sanctimonious talk of principles and justice, also sanctimonious and justice from India. The purpose of diplomacy is to navigate this difficult, duplicitous and immoral terrain to pursue national interests, which we failed in this case. Why US is necessary? US calls on world to respect India's border, says Garcetti in Arunachal. Beijing, Washington trade charges over US vessel in South China Sea. Like I said, the United States is everywhere. FMs of Japan, South Korea and China hold talks, and this is only after Biden's talk with Xi. Beijing isn't backing off Taiwan. Xi is raising pressure to sway the island's presidential elections. India should be watchful, shows the United States. Pro-independence party grabs lead in Taiwan election poll. So, tough times out there. Taiwan rewires economic ties with China. China is a worried person. US ready to send an Indian to International Space Station next year, says NASA chief. As US sanctions on Venezuela ease, India set to import oil after 3 years. So now this is also done partly a lot for India because it allows it to be weaned off Russian oil, was to open Venezuela. So all these steps are being taken in tandem with India, folks. So do remember that right after this came out, we've started importing from there, right? And I just read out the article. The United States has the bandwidth and deep pockets. U.S. Defense Secretary Austin visits Kyiv, announces $100 million military aid. Missiles, mines, shells, Germany to send more military aid to Ukraine. So while the United States is focusing on Israel and the Pacific, Germany is pulling its weight against Russia. US NATO pull back from military treaty. Russia strikes, leaves 400 Ukraine towns in dark. India taking steps to avoid virtual protest at G20 summit. Okay, now let me just say this. One was the warning Blinken gave was to India, and the second, guess where it was? It was to Israel. Blinken urges Israel to comply with international law. All's ended. Bombing resumes in Gaza minutes after end of truce. Israel, Hamas agree to extend Gaza ceasefire. That's finished now. Israel pushes India for Hamas ban amid Arab solidarity show. India is in a tough spot here. Gaza truce lasts another day. More hostages freed. PM meets Israel president, calls for early durable solution. So pressure on Israel both from the United States and India in tandem. But this is what you need to understand. Attila Somwafi, he is the writer, is a political analyst from Israel. What he writes, King Bibi and his 9 lives. The Israeli PM is no ordinary politician. For him, survival comes first, even in the middle of an Israel-Hamas war. This is what you have to remember. This war is all about him, folks. But for Netanyahu, polls come first, survival comes first. Can politics wait? Not for Benjamin Netanyahu. Perhaps the most cynical politician in the Middle East, second only to the ruler of Qatar. Look at where all Qatar is, right? Like I said, this Israel hostage deal to pause, war very close, that happened. Biden tells Netanyahu, agree to a short ceasefire. You are losing high ground. He did it, but he's about to lose that again. Be more sympathetic to Palestinians, EU told by Arab leaders. Gaza enters fragile calm as first hostage is freed. Gazans try to go back home, report Israeli troops fired on them. Ceasefire deal frees 24 hostages, a lot more that came out. Hamas game plan, delay and survive. And also just remember, this plan was out there in the open a year ago, right? Hostage deal eases pressure on Biden. Now this is the important part, right? He's come back apparently in the polls in the US. So that's important for him. Gaza diplomacy cements Qatar's role as mediator. With Venezuela, with this, and guess what? Qatar is where our soldiers are facing death penalty. What's going to happen? My call is the United States, if we play ball, in the case of Pannu, Nijar, and this Gupta fellow, I think we at least will get our soldiers away from the death penalty. Otherwise, your guess is as good as mine, folks. 3 cheers and Jai Hind. But just do remember, most of the time we tend to believe like we're it's indispensable, like that's Sanjay Baru. But that's not the case. There are many alternatives to India. But at this time, we have the wind behind our sails because of China, primarily because of China. And we are now a critical cog as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, as far as West Asia is concerned, because we sit where we sit. We gotta use it intelligently and not rock that boat because of misplaced feeling of, you know what I mean. 3 cheers, Jai Hind.